All right. So how's everybody doing? Django wise and otherwise. Anybody implement anything fun yesterday? So I want to talk about something that I think a bunch of you saw go by on one of the channels yesterday. Uh, Kind of about the amount of time that we're giving Django, and notably the amount of time that we're giving Django at Lambda School compared to the amount of time that you guys have had with React and JavaScript, which has been substantial. How many weeks of full stack web stuff did you guys have? I forget how many it is. More than 10, 15, 20, 20, right? Somebody help me out. How long was the program before computer science? 3 months? 15 weeks. All right. So that was a long time. That was a lot of React and JavaScript. So by comparison, we're looking at Django for 1 week. So the amount of coverage we're getting with Django is relatively low, but there is rationale for that, and I wanted to talk a little bit about that rationale. So certainly with the full stack web stuff, this is going to be your initial field. Like, you're going to get most of your training here. You're going to step into a job that has a lot of exactly that kind of stuff in it, and that is the intent of that focus, and presumably and hopefully what you guys have gotten out of it. But the intent here is a little bit different with Django. We certainly don't intend to produce world-class Django developers in 1 week. So what is the intention? And I'd like you guys to think about that for a second, because learn to learn. Exactly. Because here at Lambda School, we have a rationale for it. And that is why we teach it. But everybody, when they learn something, they get their own gain out of it, if I can put it that way. So we definitely want people to learn. And after Lambda School, it's going to be just like this, except some other framework potentially, and you won't have a week's worth of time to mess around with it in a directed way. It'll be a week's worth of time to mess around with it in an undirected way. It'll be all you. Like, basically, you'll be inventing the class for yourself for learning the new framework once you get out in the field. So with that in mind, that's one of the reasons that this is way more hands-off, and it's still directed. It's just a lot less material. We're kind of like, here's the very jumpstart thing, and this is getting started. But the rest of that stuff, if you get out there and somebody says, hey, you know some Django? You'd be like, well, I've got the beginner level intro is kind of what you got. But you also have the skills that you've developed over all this time at Lambda School to pick up the rest of it. So tying back to learning to learn, as much as we would love to always be here to offer instruction on whatever comes along in your job, we're not going to be. It's just going to advance too quickly. There are too many of you. If you had to learn it on your own, you might run through the tutorial. Exactly how I learn things on my own. Find a good tutorial, find a bunch of Stack Overflow answers, find a good book, something like that. I'll always be around to be messaged. Yes, that's fine too. But I gotta warn you guys, it's I've probably said this before, the field is really vast, and the amount of stuff I don't know personally is it's huge. It's huge, the amount of stuff I don't know. Chances are extremely high that you'll be like, oh, I got this job and we're using brand new framework X. I'll be like, never heard of that. The only thing that I can bring to the table in cases like that is my ability to learn. So one of my instructors said this at university once, kind of caught us off guard a little bit. He's like, you don't need me to teach you this. You know, I just read it in the book and then tell you guys how it works. Like, there's no magic to it. But he had a skill, which was he was able to learn new stuff more quickly than the students were. We had less practice learning new things than he had, and less, our web of knowledge was also smaller. And so he could skim a book of new material he'd never seen before and pick it up more quickly because his learning skill was better than ours was. And then he was a teacher. So he also had an additional skill of being able to explain things clearly and helpfully in a way that got us past the bump of learning in a shorter time than we might have been able to do on our own. That was long-winded. I've got a little more, though. Another thing that we want you guys to get out of this is exposure to a pretty radically different framework than the one that you've used before. So there's some things in here that Django's kind of doing in a magical way, filling in a bunch of gaps for you with sort of a minimal amount of code that you put in. And this is a way that some frameworks just work. Some are more like that. Some are less like that and more hand-holdy, where you have to be more direct about what the framework does. And you guys might have a preference. Most developers are opinionated about something. I don't know. What do you guys like more? The React Node stack that you've been using, or this sort of Django stack, like Node all the way? There's nothing wrong with that. Depends on the MVP. That's actually my favorite answer. I'm a big fan of the right tool for the job. And certainly there is a job for which Django is better suited than Node. And certainly there is a job for which Node is better suited than Django. So it's, in my mind, you can't really say one is simply better than the other, because you have to say one is better than the other in a given context. You can say things like, hey, Node is more applicable in more contexts. It's generally better, but there's always some place where Django would be better to use. And so if you come out of Lambda school and we've taught you how to use the hammer of React and Node really well, then every problem is going to look like a nail for that hammer, right? But here we're saying, oh, by the way, we taught you how to use that hammer really well. But just so you know, there's also this tool, the radial sander. And now you might think, oh, well, this exists. I'm not super good at the radial sander yet, but I know it exists now, and I know I don't have to sand my wood planks with a hammer anymore. But the tools are kind of different, so some of them are applicable in one circumstance and not so much in another. But knowing the other tool exists is useful, and also knowing a tool exists that is kind of pretty different than the one that you know, that's also, in my mind, that's more useful. It's if you know two things that are pretty similar, the additional knowledge gain from learning the second thing isn't that high because it's so similar to the first thing. But if you learn things that are fairly dissimilar, then the amount of knowledge gained is much higher as you try to build your web of knowledge with the new material and try to mesh that in with what you already know. This rationale also drives the language choices in the computer science program that Python, Python and C are pretty much on opposite ends of the spectrum. So when you learn C, you will learn a lot of new stuff. Anyway, that's my little pep talk. Any thoughts on that? And you won't come out of here being C experts, I don't think. But C is merely the vehicle for learning to learn. Too deep this early in the morning? Or did it all make sense? I have a confession. I was working on the web server sprint last night until way too early in the morning. I could probably use another hour of sleep. I kept getting the thing almost done. It was like, almost done. It's almost working. Then I went to bed, and I couldn't quite sleep either because I was still all wired up. So I find myself saying things like Pascal instead of Python. How did that happen? What do you guys think about this whole web of knowledge thing and perspective with different technologies? Pascal is pretty different. Because I feel it's important, but that's a conclusion I came to after many years of doing software development. And at first I was just kind of playing around in the sandbox of software, not really in a directed way, and I hadn't formalized to myself, like, how am I learning this stuff and how am I actually getting better in this field? I'm wondering if you guys are like, yeah, that makes sense, or Beej, that sounds like a lot of weird new age philosophy. Oh, you just made my stomach hurt. I don't want to drink the ocean. Yeah, better to navigate. Oh, I like that sentiment, Vim. The more structured the learning may have to be, for the further the tool is from our existing knowledge. I was never trained in like heavy duty functional programming. I was pretty good with like map and filter and stuff like that. That makes sense to me. But when you go into a language that, like Erlang, was tough for me to learn. Erlang has variables, but you can never change the values in them. You can set them once, and that's it. And when I learned that, pretty much every technique I had for getting software written involved changing the values in variables, right? I do an awful lot of that. They're called variables for a reason. But in Erlang, you can't change the value once it's set. And so my first thought was, how do you do anything? Like, how do you do anything with this language? And so the learning was heavy for me on that, really slow going. And building new nodes in my web of knowledge that just simply didn't exist. And some of them were out on their own for a while, not really tied into anything. And that was a long, heavy-duty learning experience. Yeah, a lot of functional languages are big on not having side effects. In fact, I would say not having side effects is sort of a trademark of functional languages. I'm glad. Yeah, I'm glad it's weird with computer science. It's the hard sell. Uh, you're like, hey, I've learned how to do web apps. That's what I'm doing. Why the computer science stuff? But learning to learn is what's going to keep you ahead. Being able to learn stuff quickly will keep you ahead. When the company says, hey, we need to do this new thing, and companies say that all the time, it's going to be the engineers that quickly pick up that new thing that are the ones that are the most valuable. So I wouldn't call it a random question, Arthur. I'd call it a pretty direct and apropos question. Yeah, I'll get to that. And what should we be doing today? And for this, I apologize a little. I shouldn't say I apologize a little bit. That sounds like I'm half-heartedly apologizing. I am wholeheartedly apologizing because this is the first time we've taught this class with the pre-course videos. So Thursday came up a little bit late, and I've got some stuff. I've got some stuff for you to work on today. So some hopefully challenging things. Yeah, learning to ignore. Yes, ties into identify why something wouldn't be a good option. So that kind of analysis sometimes needs to be done up front. That's a scary analysis to have to do because you know that the stakes are pretty high. Let's say somebody's going to work on a project that's huge and it's going to take a year to implement, and they're like, which web framework should we use to do this? The decision up front of which web framework is worth, potentially tens of millions of dollars one way or another, depending on how good the tool is for the job. So being able to analyze these things and assess them is an excellent skill. And if you only have one tool in your toolkit, then being able to do analysis of other ones is going to be trickier. So having one and a half with the Django stuff is far better. Because now you've started thinking like, okay, Django has these strengths and these weaknesses. And React has these strengths and these weaknesses. And just knowing what the strengths and weaknesses can be, that's pretty big for making an assessment of which toolkit you want to use. So let's see here. Yeah, Arthur, about how many lines of code was it to get the login registration page set up? And I like Thomas's observation here. Like the end result between Node and Django is fairly similar, at least the way we're using Django, just setting up the REST endpoint. But we're seeing the differences in the implementation details. So Django, you type in a few lines of code and it does all this crazy stuff. Often, it is the case that when something is easier to set up, it is less flexible when you try to customize it, just like Thomas was saying. That said, in my limited experience with Django, the customization has seemed to go pretty smoothly. I'm kind of impressed. I thought it was going to be way less flexible than it actually is. Quick, cheap, and beautiful. Pick two. Right. There you go. So we haven't really talked about templates at all, and it's the front end part of Django is not really in the curriculum here. And I think I mentioned early on, it's goes to Django's multi-page application type of front end. Everybody's so happy about single page applications now. I'm a big fan of single page apps myself. All right. Let's see. Stretch. Notes for myself what to talk about. I'm lame. I don't even know what a PWA is. So apparently they're not on my horizon. Something web app. Progressive web apps. Today I learned that progressive web apps were a thing. What's the difference between a progressive web app and a web app? Quick loading or quick response? I like it. I'm reading the page. It looks like it's more of a conceptual thing than uh, like a technological thing. I love the idea of web apps loading more quickly because, man, load times have suffered, especially on web pages that are packed full of ads. This, the page here says 53% of users will abandon a site if it takes longer than 3 seconds to load. I think I'd probably do that. 3 seconds is a while. I love this. This is something to dig into. It looks like the goals of this are totally laudable. Good stuff. Some of the things that we learn here at Lambda School in the computer science program are useful for stuff like this, I think. Like, don't load more than you have to initially, like load the bare minimum to get the thing up and running. When I worked in advertising and I built out web ads, there were limitations like that. Like the amount of data that could be transmitted before the initial screen or the initial view of the ad was shown was a relatively small amount of data. It was, I think it was about 100 kilobytes. So once 100 kilobytes had gone by, the ad had to start working. And once the ad started working, you could keep loading more stuff. And then there was a limit on that, like a megabyte or something like that. But it was, the idea was to get it running quickly. And so you had these multi-stage loaders that came into play, where the initial loader would load just what was needed to start the thing. And then while that animation was playing, meanwhile in the background, it's like busy loading all the rest of the stuff that needs to continue on. So it was all about, because if people scroll by and then they don't see the ad because it's still loading all the contents for it, then that was a waste. That's why they had these, we had all these progressive loading things that happened. I shouldn't say progressive because maybe that doesn't, we're talking about progressive web apps, but interesting technical challenges there. All right, questions about the stuff that we've been working on. So last night was the React REST framework token authentication. Oh yeah, we haven't talked about setting up the root endpoint at all. Did anybody do that? Because there is a way to set it up with just a static page. And I've done it like 4 months ago, so I can't remember how to do it. I just remember it was only a few lines of code. It's like something about template as view. Did anybody actually run through that by any chance? Yeah, I'm digging. Oh, ha, 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 ha. All right. So that's part of it, and then you also have a template somewhere, right? I appreciate this because it'll save me digging around live to remember how to do it. Was there a, Ahmed, did you have a template that was, because the context gets passed in, right? Yeah. Yeah, like an HTML file or something. And then you wired this thing up in your urls.py somehow. Let's see here. It's a good diagram here. So kind of what we're seeing here. So here's views and URLs. So we figure out for this path, it was for your index path. That doesn't make it the root path, does it? Or does it? But this looks in views.index. Right here. And also, what's your HTML file? I can try copying this in. And views.index. Yeah. So this HTML's got all kinds of good stuff in it. Let's see, what did you have that insert me. Did that get put in here anywhere? I guess it didn't, but it could have. It was working for a second. So yeah, we got this template.html, which looks like regular HTML, except it has these template language directives buried inside it, like these. And that thing is going to get hooked up through this endpoint and URL patterns, which we got to figure out how this works. And then here in our views, from first app import views, right? Okay. It's all making a little more sense to me now. In the views, we say, hey, we want to render this when we get this index request, which is lines up with that index there. And we can put this context in here. This insert me would be accessible inside our HTML if we wanted. But I don't think you're using it in yours. All right, so here's same thing, except you've got your registration stuff there. There is a quicker way to do this. There's a way to do this where we don't have to declare the index view. Arthur, what's your urls.py look like? There's a way to do this where you can just render a straight template as a view by itself, and I can't remember what that is. Class-based views, template view as view. Yeah, something like this. So there's a shortcut you can take. If you don't need to do any kind of customization in here when you're creating your view, you can use this template view to just suck in some straight HTML and put it at a path. And I'm not sure. Let's see here. I just need to know where this HTML file actually needs to go. That's what I can't remember. Where in the directory hierarchy does this thing have to appear? Subclassing generic views. All right, let's make this happen. So I want to add something like this to my URL patterns. I just need to figure out where that thing goes. Let's see, URLs. I'm just going to try, oops, template view, and then we're going to try doing exactly what it says, and we'll worry about the root path in a minute. Totally rusty about this. All right, so I totally do not have an about.html at all. Let's try running it. Let's see, I don't need this anymore. And see what error it throws out about where it can't find something. So, oh, I'm logged in as me. All right, template does not exist. Fair enough. It's going to tell me where it thinks it wants it, though. You guys have a guess where I should throw this about.html template? It has to go somewhere. Templates folder. Is there a templates folder already? And does it go out of the root, or does it go out of notes or somewhere else? On the Jorg level. This is where my memory is failing me. Or on notes. I guess we'll try some stuff. Let's see what happens. There's my entire about HTML. Let's learn something new. Still said it didn't exist. I'm going to make sure the server restarted. Oh, it got templates out at the root level. Well, let's see if this works. because I moved it into the, there it is, about. And then let's also, let's try moving it here to the root and see if that still works. No. All right. So it didn't like it in de jure, it didn't like it in the roots, it just likes it in the notes, which kind of weirds me out a little bit. Why does it have to be in notes? This doesn't make any sense to me. Does that make any sense to you guys? Notes is like an app. You should be able to have an about page on like a global level. See if Stack Overflow will save me. Yeah, there definitely is the views.py in in the notes, but why are we hitting that in specific? I swear I had it in there. One more try. Oops. In de jure, right? I swear I had it in here, and it was unhappy. It's unhappy. Hmm. Is it relative? I don't know. You mean like if I put in a full path to it? Oh, but that doesn't make any sense. Template name about project app templates. Let's see here. I guess what's freaking me out is that somehow this knows to look in the notes app, and it's freaking me out because I don't know why it decides to look in the notes app. What if I had a different app? Which one would it look at? What if I had two apps? How would it know which templates to go to? App templates app. So weird. Oh, this looks interesting. Apter is true. All right. Dirs is a list of directories where the engine should look for template source files. Defaults to an empty list. Let's see what this apters thing is. The loader performs an optimization when it first runs. It caches a list of which installed apps packages have a templates subdirectory. All right. So what seems to happen is when we first start up, because I have apters set to true here, is it goes through all the application directories and it looks for templates within those. And I'm kind of wondering if I could add add another directory here for like more global stuff. So it will, yeah, that question does still remain. It sort of seems like, hey, I've just gone and I've analyzed all the app directories you have, and I've found about.html in there. So, hey, I'm going to use that one. But what if we have two? Then which one is going to use? So I've just made another app that's got nothing in it. So everything should still be happy. And let's see, template does not exist because I don't have it in my notes right now. Actually, let's try moving the other one in here. Oh, I haven't added that to my installed apps because it said it only went through and looked at the installed apps. Turning quite a rabbit hole. Another underscore app. Server relaunched. All right, so it finds it in either place now. Oh wait, it's probably cached. Let's restart it and force it to change its caching. Yeah, I think adding to the DIRs is what's going to be the actual answer we want. Now I'm just exploring. Wow. All right. So let's make about one and about two, just like Vim says. Let's see how this works. All right. Kind of feel like it's going to choose one or the other. I feel like we're in this weird back corner case. And that the right answer is actually just to put it in another directory and do DIRs. All right, so it's giving us the about out of notes. So if I blow that away, then it seems like it should give us the about out of another app. Yep. Wow. That's all kind of interesting. Okay. Learned some new stuff. What have we learned? The line from one of the Spider-Man movies I love, where he's like, "What have we learned? I guess we've learned never to do it again." All right. So what happened after all that? Okay. So we've got the template section here that has some description about how the template's behavior should be. And one of the things that we have here is this app_dirs, and that's set to true. And what this is telling Django is, hey, I want you to go through all the applications here, namely another app and notes, and look for templates within those things. So the first thing Django does when it runs, because app_dirs is true, is it goes to another app, templates, and caches all those. It goes to the notes app, templates, caches all those. And then it'll use a template there if it matches the one we're looking for in urls.py. So I'm saying, hey, match me about.html as the template, and it's going to go look in the cache from all those app_dirs it looked for and try to figure out if it has an about.html in there anywhere. And clearly we can only serve one of them because we're serving a web page out. So it chooses one, apparently, almost at random. It's like, well, I found one in Notes, and I found one in another app, so here's the one out of Notes. And then when I went later on, I deleted the one out of Notes. It still had the about.html in another app, and it used that one because that was there. But this is kind of silly because here in this usage, I'm saying, hey, about.html, that's kind of a system-wide thing. It's not a per app thing. So wouldn't it be nice if we could make this system-wide instead of per app? And wouldn't it be nice if we could just have some templates directory that we could use for the system-wide about.html? And I think we can do that with this. So I'm kind of hoping I can actually just put templates here. Am I close? Am I close to spelling templates? Is that about right? Yeah, so unique names for your template files. I think if you have your path set up right, so that you have like the path going, like maybe all of one app is underneath one directory hierarchy, then I think it'll take care of that. Let's see if I can add a new templates directory here. So I'm just going to move this. It's got to be a hotkey to switch tabs in terminal. I just don't know what it is. Let's see. So I have templates here. I'm just going to move that out of here back to the root. So now I have a templates in here. And I'm hoping that by adding that templates directory that I just made out of the root, hopefully by adding it right here, this works. See, Josh had Josh/templates. I'm going to just see if I can make it out of the root and see what happens. I like this. About.html, deleted from disk. Oh dear. I guess I should probably close that. Okay. Now what are we doing? Let's get this homepage working. Or this about page. We haven't even started the homepage part yet. About in root. Yes. All right, so we got about, but we still don't have our root page set up. We can try to set this up next and see if something weird happens that is unknowable. Yeah, the lock item, this is KeyPass, my password manager. Oh, all right. So that's about, but what about the root one? I'm kind of hoping that this also can be set up conveniently with template as view, but one of you was saying that there was trouble with it. So one thing I've given up here with, I'm using template as view, I've given up the ability to customize the output of these HTML files at all. We saw earlier that with the template, you could do all kinds of weird template-ish stuff. Where was it? Like injecting values in here. You pass a context in that has special fields in it, so you could customize the output. Like, imagine a very simple customization case where you wanted the current time of the page load to show up on the page. You could have a dictionary here that has the current time. You could figure out what the current time is using the date time stuff in Python. And then the current time in the dictionary here gets passed in as the context. And you can actually render the date time right here. So figure out something in code up here and then have it render down here when the page gets rendered. So if you're willing to add stuff to your view that looks like this and put the path in just like it's been done here, then you can actually customize, you can greatly customize the output. Doing it the way I'm doing it here with template as view, this is just a shortcut. We don't have to modify our views.py file, but in exchange for that, we no longer get to customize the output of these HTML files. And maybe that's okay because maybe they're just static. So let's see here, templates. Let's put in, what I call it, root.html. Very exciting homepage. Everybody got their fingers crossed? All right. Remove the slash. Is it unnecessary? I'm not targeting an include. All right. All right. Remove the slash. It's unnecessary. Path nothing. All right. Place your bets, everybody. Make sure about still works. About still happy. Homepage! Homepage! So happy to see the words homepage appear on the screen. Straightforward once we get through it. So yeah, what was all that? Quick recap. So empty path, and then we use template as view to get our template loaded, and root.html is a file that our homepage is in, and I've got that in the templates subdirectory that's straight out of the root for the entire repo. And we configured Django to know to look in that templates directory by adding that in settings.py under templates. We said, hey, in addition to all the application DIRs that you're going to look in for each of their own private template subdirectories, let's also look just in templates out of the root of the repo. Woohoo! Slowly coming back to me after shaking off some rust. Oh, interesting. Because Baster is the app. Yeah, I like that. The os.path.join is an interesting one. Does anybody know why that function exists? So when you're building a path, don't you just throw some slashes between the things? That's exactly it. The path separator is different. In fact, in Python, there's os.path.sep, S-E-P, that has the path separator in there. So different platforms have different path separators. This can also bite you in Node if you're putting a path together. So, oh, that was a bit of a haul for a homepage. I think that is pretty typical, though, for how I learn stuff. So we have to figure out the magical 4 lines that we need to know to put in there. But along the way, we learned a whole bunch of stuff. Like we kind of learned what happens if you've got multiple templates directories with the same file in it. Like it kind of just chooses one at random. And we learned how to put a templates directory elsewhere for more global templates, stuff like that. A lot of stuff got learned along the way, even though at the end of the day we only added like 5-10 lines of code or something. So os.path.join, it probably depends on os.path.sep, and I'm betting that that thing is, how does that work? Okay, so the interpreter is gonna have that built into it, the Python interpreter. So if you're running the Python interpreter on Windows, os.path.sep is going to be a backslash, and if you're running it on a Mac, os.path.sep is going to be a /. So when you run os.path.join, if you're running it on a Windows machine, it'll join it with backslashes, and if you run it on a Linux machine or Mac, it'll join it with /. Is that answering your question, Mark? Depends on the interpreter platform. I think it's rolled into the binary. So if you're running like python.exe on Windows, it's just been built with that setting set as part of the build process. So when the Python executable itself was constructed, some parameters got set in there saying, oh, hey, by the way, oh, this is Windows. And the Python interpreter is written in C. So the C way of doing that would be using the preprocessor directives. And so there'd be some code in the C code for the Python interpreter that looked like if def Windows, then the path separator equals backslash. Else if def Linux, then it equals a /. And so it probably gets detected at build time. But I'm speculating a bit here. How prevalent are templated views in industry? I don't have a good answer. I just throw an order of magnitude gut feel guess out there. I'm going to say for client-facing stuff, let's go with, I don't know. Let's go with 60% templated views and 40% just a REST backend with like a React front end. And I'm going to say that's plus or minus 30%. I'm not highly confident in that guess. For stuff that's not client-facing, like internal tools, I'll bet you see a lot more templated views because I think the development time is a bit lower. And for internal tools, nobody really cares if it's a single-page application. Those internal tools tend to be a little less polished than client-facing stuff. Working on the hunch is kind of weird. So I got a couple things to say about that. It's nice to have your hunch backed up by some documentation somewhere. And so on another window here, I do have documentation open about like the template settings to see what this stuff actually means. Sometimes if you just run on hunches and you get something working, you're like, woo, it works, I'm done. But sometimes you've accidentally relied on something that was undocumented or maybe not the actual proper way to do it. So it's a great way to explore. I think as President Reagan famously said, trust but verify. So I can mess around with it and see how the system works. And then if you can find some documentation that says, oh yeah, that's the right way to do it, then excellent. But it is a good way of exploring. Like part of knowing a system like Django is trying to figure out how the black box works. We saw that diagram yesterday of how all the Django pieces come together. And if you know how it works internally, then you are better at using it from a user standpoint, from its externally defined interface. It's not mandatory to know how it works internally, but the more you know, the better you'll be. And usually, for me personally, I figure out those internals by poking around at it and trying stuff like we just did. Let's try it with this over here, and let's try it with this over here, and see how it behaves. And then that helps my mental model of the black box of Django get more complete. And hunches, maybe if I do have good hunches, it's just because I've explored so much stuff. So I wish I had like a magic switch. I could be like, oh, here's how to get better at having hunches. But really, the way to do it is to just explore a bunch of stuff, flail around a lot. Uh, you guys might think sometimes you have these bugs and you're like, man, I can't believe we spent 2 hours on this bug. Somewhere in the back of your head, you might be thinking, Beej wouldn't spend 2 hours on this bug. Uh, and I might not do it today, but I can guarantee you that I've spent 2 hours on that bug before. So you guys aren't alone, and people with more experience don't have some magical ability that you are lacking somehow. It's simply that those bugs that you are going through right now that can be so frustrating are exactly the bugs that all of us have gone through in exactly the same way, spending just as long hammering through them. And some of those things, I'll make those same mistakes like 3 or 4 times before it finally sinks in. This bug again. Ah, my least favorite thing is when I get a bug, I see it, I see the effect, and I'm like, I remember this. I had this bug 2 weeks ago. I remember it took like 3 hours to find the answer, and I don't remember what the answer is. I remember how long it took, but I don't remember what the answer is. So frustrating. Yeah, Eric, unless the person who wrote the documentation did the same thing. We can hope that the person who wrote the documentation actually has better understanding of the black box because maybe they were the author of it. But yeah, a lot of documentation that's out there is exactly like that. Somebody writes a blog post, like, hey, I messed around with this thing for a while, and this is what it looks like how it works. Maybe they got it right. Yes. Seems to be a small bug, but then you start learning about static files. Lots of these small bugs, almost all of them open big doors. You're like, oh, hey, there's an entire system out here behind this thing. Just like we're like, where do we put about.html? And suddenly, oh, hey, there's a big system of how template directories get cached and per app stuff. And there's still outstanding questions in my mind. Like, what if you do have the same template name in two different apps? How does it differentiate between the two of them? Can you make it differentiate? Like, hey, I should have about for one app and about for another app, and they're both called about.html. How does that work? That's still an outstanding question we stumbled across, but don't know the answer to yet. All right. Been way long. The break is super overdue this time. I've got a list of like, let's see, it's three big things that you guys can work on today, and or we can talk about in the remaining time. But let's do a 5 minute break, and everybody can grab more coffee and stuff. I apologize for running an hour and 15 minutes without one. Sound good? Oh, look, sneak preview of the stuff I was working on last night. I don't know. When you guys, quick question, off topic. When you guys see this cache put function, how freaked out are you? Because you haven't done C yet, have you? So it's probably extra freaky. Maybe I'll ask after you've done some C. Okay, let's break. So you don't have to look at that. Fun fact: for a long time, C was my favorite language. It still is in some contexts. I had learned Pascal, and I was like, "Holy cow, this is amazing! The code it builds is so fast, and it's so easy to write, so much easier than assembly language." I was so happy with it, and then I learned C, and I was like, "This is the way to do it." It's like assembly language with the pain taken away. It made me so happy. Uh, Grim, what's the contender? What do you mean? I know this is break time. I shouldn't be talking. I should be getting my tea. Oh, I like. If I had to take one language to a desert island, it would be Go today. Go is not the right tool for all jobs, but I have a lot of fun with it. I don't think anything will replace C. It's got its niche. I mean, eventually it'll go away, but it's still really good for like embedded programming, and you've got yourself like a Raspberry Pi or something. Anyway, I've only got 3 minutes. I'm gonna go make some tea. I'll be right back. All right. Oh, what's Go's niche? Oh, I would say that Go excels at multi-threaded applications. So if you want to write a server that's multi-threaded, Go is great at that. Node does its concurrency in a single-threaded way. So it uses callbacks and uh, like async and await and stuff, uses those to effectively do multiple things at once, but really Node just uses one CPU core unless you're using web workers. But if you want to use more CPU cores, Go does it quite nicely. You can launch all the threads you want, and like thousands of them if you want, and it automatically schedules those between all the CPU cores you have available. And it's got a really nice message passing system for dealing with multi-threading issues. We don't really talk about multi-threading much at Lambda School, but anytime you have a shared resource between threads, those threads can step on each other's toes and you have to deal with that. And Go has a good method of message passing that kind of sidesteps a lot of those problems. So it's plus I find the language itself easy to read and write. And that's not really much of a gain over, say, JavaScript, which I also find really easy to read and write. But compared to C++, a lot of the C++ annoyances are gone. Languages like Rust have their place too, and I really appreciate what Rust does, but I find it really hard to read because it's got so much punctuation all over the place. Anyway, Go is fun. There is a Go meetup here at Lambda School that meets Fridays at 5, I think, on the Go channel, if you're interested. With WebAssembly coming, C may be here to say, well, there's no reason for C to ever go away in the future history of the world, but it'll probably become less and less used. Anything can be compiled into anything. So, I mean, JavaScript can be compiled to WebAssembly. Go can be compiled to WebAssembly, C. So with WebAssembly coming, I think what we're going to see is that virtually every language can be compiled to WebAssembly. Oh, yeah, 5 magic lines of code. Let's look at this. So the 5 magic lines were probably the ones in URLs, right? So in urls.py, we did a couple things. We brought in template view from Django views generic. And then we added these paths to the URL patterns, putting an about page and the root page. Was this the stuff, Thomas? Cool. Template view.asView might actually have more parameters as well that we could mess with. You'd have to look at the docs and see. Questions or comments on anything so far? That's a fun little exploration into adding more straightforward paths. If there's nothing else on that, I've got the stuff that you guys can work on today. And this is a little more self-directed. And again, like I was saying earlier, that's kind of by design. But out of this stuff that I have on my list, I would say do it all if you can. Uh, Probably starting with the one thing that you find the most interesting. Two of them are GraphQL programming related, and one of them is just messing around with Django to see how it works related, kind of in the same way we're experimenting with templates here. But let's see, the GraphQL stuff. I have two challenges for you on this, and I'm going to write this up and post it to the channel. One of those challenges is to add a mutation to be able to create a new note from the GraphQL interface. So, are we still running that server? I don't know where it is anymore. So from here, we had our notes query, but it would be really nice if we could also create a note in here. So that's one of the things we can work on today, is adding the mutation to create a new note. Another thing that we can work on is adding a way to search, say, by title. So right now we can't do that because we don't have arguments set up. And I don't actually even have instructions for how to figure this out. I've done it before in the past, so some Googling can be done to try to figure out how to make this work. So like if we put an argument in here like this, it should just return the record for which title is test. But as you see here, we're getting this message back saying that it doesn't know what the title argument is. Something we have to program in to make that work. So a couple GraphQL things to work on. Getting these arguments to work on the query, and then also adding a mutation to create a new note. So there's a couple things. We also don't have a way right now to authenticate with GraphQL at all. Like the fact that we're able to do things like look up our notes. If we wanted to do this on a per user basis, we'd have to log in through the admin interface and use a session here to keep track of the currently logged in user. So there are ways and there are packages out there to help do user authentication through GraphQL. So that would be another thing to work on. And again, I'll write all this up right after class here. The other thing, the mess around with stuff thing, was let's see here what I can find on this. Is making queries. So creating objects, yes, saving changes. Is this what I'm after? Queries that they're lazy. Now I want to find the reference. Oh, maybe this is the reference. Here we go. So check this out. we've got some model called entry, and remember, objects is the manager for getting stuff out of there. And there's a get. We've already seen like note.objects.all, but apparently there's also note.objects.get, and you can specify what you want to get out of here. You can say like, hey, I want to get the headline out of this entry, where the headline is exactly this. And by adding this underscore underscore and the suffix to the name of the field, you end up modifying the behavior of how the Django ORM queries work. This is kind of neat right here. It says, hey, if you run this, then you end up with this SQL statement. But here we've got also iExact, right? A case insensitive version. I contains, we've got starts with and ends with. We've got all kinds of stuff here. So this is something that you can mess with just with your Notes app. You can start up the Python shell with manage.py shell, and you can bring in your notes, and you can mess around with all these different queries using filter, using get, and so on. So there's a lot of stuff to be learned here. Including this stuff. These the relationships that you can query on are pretty nuts. You know what I can give you guys? There's actually an old sprint challenge. I can give you that. Not as an official sprint challenge or anything, but it's got a lot of tweaky questions about like, how can you filter based on this? And how can you filter based on that? I'll throw that to you too. So it'll be kind of your discretion today. Do you want to work on GraphQL stuff? Do you want to mess with Django ORM stuff? But I'll put that together and then you can hack on it after lunch. Thoughts on that? Everybody's gut feel, gut reaction. So this way you'll have plenty of stuff to do today and not run out, hopefully. If you do run out after I list all this stuff, please let me know and I can always put more on there. Cool. So, one more note to myself. Let's see. Login, query. Okay. All right. 8 minutes left. What do we want to talk about? Could be anything. Even the GraphQL stuff. Man, I barely know anything about it. I'm happy to try, though. So it's my understanding that WebAssembly is a completely different interpreter than JavaScript. And so you'll have in your browser, you'll have a WebAssembly interpreter and you'll have a JavaScript interpreter. And WebAssembly is just a bunch of low-level instructions that probably don't do much on their own, but if you put a bunch of them together, you get good out. Let me see if I can find something like this. Oh. Got some types, validations. This is an interesting thing. Interesting reference. Talks about all the different individual instructions, and it's a binary format, WebAssembly, so it's not human readable when it's been assembled. But that's the intent. The intent is you'll take some human readable language like C or JavaScript, and then you'll run a compiler, and the compiler will output WebAssembly, and then your browser will run the WebAssembly. It's got some benefits to it. One of them is that WebAssembly is really small and concise, being a binary format. It doesn't have to be human readable, so you can get rid of all these braces and parentheses and white space and all this other stuff that you don't need, and collapse it down into a really small space. So it'll help with load times. Ish. Like probably most of the website load time is assets like graphics and stuff, but this will help. Theoretically, it could run a little bit faster because it's easier to write a just-in-time compiler for something like WebAssembly than it is to write it for JavaScript. So when the browser gets its hands on the WebAssembly, it's a pretty straightforward path to take that and turn it into actual machine code to have it run as fast as possible. So I think it's going to be awesome. I think it's going to open a lot of doors. We'll be able to use a lot of different languages to write stuff for the web, and the stuff that we write will run well and fast. And we can still write in JavaScript, even if we got rid of the JavaScript interpreter inside the web browser, which probably won't happen for like decades. Even if we did that, we could still compile our JavaScript to WebAssembly and still have it run. So yeah, I mean, you're totally right. It's got to do that stuff. Yeah, next week's project. I saw that go by. Um, but there's not that much to talk about yet. So I will give you the high level overview of what the thing is going to be. And I'm not going to give you the spec yet because the spec is actually being actively worked on right now. We're trying to decide effectively how much work and how hard it's going to be. And we're tuning that right now. But this is the plan for the project. It's basically a multi-user dungeon, a text-based MUD. And some of the backend's going to be written in Django. Some of that will be provided, and the amount of that is provided for you, that's the part that we're tuning right now. The front end will be something that you write entirely. The front end is going to be basically a text entry field where you can type stuff and then say go and have that go to use Axios, have that go over to the Django server, and the server will do the right thing with that text and send stuff back to you. There's also a third-party push notification service that's free to use and pretty easy to use. And we can make use of that to do things like when somebody else walks into the room that you're in, you can get notified. Hey, so-and-so just walked into the room. Or if you're in the room with a bunch of people and you issue the say command and you say something, everybody else in that room should see that occurring. And we have implemented this because we always implement everything that we use in the project to make sure that it's sane in its scope. And it's like many Django things, it's less code than expected. Yeah, no text allowed. It's got to be all 3D. So that's the overarching plan. And I do have a README that's written, but it's in flux, so I'm not going to share it yet. There will be an MVP for it, the basic features that need to be implemented, and then there will be the additional features. So if you get through the basic stuff, got all kinds of suggestions out there, things like NPCs and objects to pick up and drop, and combat and PvP combat. There's all kinds of stuff you can throw in. So the stretch goal list is basically infinite. So a little bit of it will be using the Django stuff to finish out that server. A little bit of it will be learning to use another third-party API, this pusher API, for sending out push notifications. And the rest of it will be refresher on building a front end. And we'll provide basic designs for that front end, but it's going to be a pretty straightforward one, like a login screen and maybe a user register screen and then the main screen, and that's pretty much it. You are the first cohort that's had a project week in the computer science program. So originally what we were going to do was some variant of the stuff that we did this week, like write a front end for the stuff that we did this week. But you guys have already had a front end project that was arguably even more complex than the back end we've written this time. So that wasn't enough. Basically, I think everybody would have went through that in like a day and a half, and then like, yeah, we already did that. So you guys are doing a bit of trailblazing. And because of that, we will tune the outcome of this project based on how well people do. Let's see. Could this be more e-commerce related? Yeah, I'll mull over that suggestion. I think that's totally valid feedback. What definitely will happen is that when you get to your labs project, you most definitely will be doing e-commerce related stuff in labs. So that will absolutely be there. Like credit card processing, that kind of stuff is in labs. It is an interesting balance because when you guys have been in the program for a while now, so like a lot of weeks have gone by, a lot of full-time weeks of working hard, and there is some aspect of what can we do that keeps interest level up. It's got to be interesting, and e-commerce stuff is interesting and definitely more applicable. But at the same time, I don't know. I think we're trying to mix it up a little bit, and this is the balance we're trying to strike. So the feedback is totally valuable. Like more real world applicable or more whimsical. We get the opportunity to be a little more whimsical in the computer science program because the stuff that we're teaching is meant to generally make you a better developer, but not generally improve your skill with a particular technology. It's designed to improve your skill across technologies. So a bit of the rationale, but again, the feedback is really useful because we're always trying to tune so that we're running the optimal program here. we don't just choose things at random. We do try to choose things that are as applicable as possible. And sometimes that means it's just good for interviews. Sometimes it means it's something you can use more frequently at your job. But but hopefully it always means that it's something that will help you learn to learn and help improve that general developer skill. The stuff that'll put you guys cut above other academies. Anyhow, I'm 4 over now. Anything else? WebAssembly. Did I just get invited to a new WebAssembly channel? Don't feel ready to be done in less than 3 months. I don't think that's bad. It depends on what you mean. You mean you don't feel ready to get out there and do the work, or you don't feel like you want to get out and do the work? When I finished my bachelor's degree, I was like, you know what? I don't feel like working. So that's why I stayed in school. But after I finished my master's degree, I was like, okay, we're done, done. Get me out of here. Yeah, that's not bad. That's I'm glad you brought that up because I think that that sentiment is really widespread because the field is so big and there is so much to learn. The more you learn, the more you realize you don't know, and that can be pretty intimidating. Sort of in the universal sense, when you look up in the night sky and you see that there are bazillions of galaxies out there, and you feel kind of small for it. That same feeling can happen because you're like, oh man, I've been working hard at this, but the more I see that I know, the more I see that I don't know, and it's a losing game. Like the amount of knowledge that gets generated every day in the field of computers is bigger than the amount of knowledge you can learn in a day. So every day you fall more and more behind in the total knowledge of the world sense. And yeah, it's like, oh man, I don't feel good about that. But I do have a couple of pointers along those lines. One is everybody feels that way because we all see how much stuff is out there. And pretty much every day you guys drop something in the channel. I'm like, man, what's that? Right? Uh, so everyone feels that way. So there's a little bit of safety in numbers. Uh, Another thing is you don't have to know everything. You can learn what you need to learn on the fly. And that's the skill that you'll have when you come out of Lambda school, is being able to pick that stuff up on the fly. And you don't need to know all of it. You just need to know something specific for today. And so you learn that thing, and then the next day you go learn the thing that needs to be learned specifically for that day. And it might be a little bit of a mindset change to think, to be comfortable with the concept, with the idea that you're not actually going to ever learn everything, that the pace of growth, like I said, is higher than any one person can keep up with. Oh, there's a there's a quote that I'm a little bit reluctant to share because it says something negative about Bible salesmen, but the intent is not to say anything negative about Bible salesmen. Let me find this quote for you guys. By a famous computer scientist named Alan Perlis. Perlis, I think. I've never heard his name actually said. This is in the preface for the famous programming book SICP. But I like this quote, especially the way it wraps the last few lines of it. Gabriel, I'm going to argue that both of those things are learning. That both what we're doing here is learning, and getting deeply acquainted with a single code base is also learning. Becoming acquainted with a thing is learning the thing. And a lot of the same skills apply to both of them. But they are different processes. I mean, sitting down and doing book learning stuff is your brain is working in a different way. You have different goals than if you're sitting down to tear into a big code base and improve that big code base, right? So it's a different mindset for different kinds of learning there. And what I'm confident that you will find is when you're digging into that code base, a lot of the theory stuff you'll find is actually being brought to bear. Sometimes in ways you might not have expected. Anyway, I know I'm over time, but I do love this this end part here. What you know about computing, other people will learn. Don't feel that the key to successful computing is only in your hands. But what you do have is the ability to see the machine as more than when you were first led up to it, that you can make it more. It's not that you have to know everything. It's that you can improve what's there and build new stuff. What was this quote here? Oh, this was the hesitant to share one because there's a subtle dig at Bible salesmen. It's hard to be 100% correct posting these things. But don't get too tied down to some one particular technology and be like, this is the technology that we're going to use all the time. So be flexible in what you learn. And he says, I think we're responsible for stretching the machine, setting them off new directions, and keeping fun in the house. So keep that creativity up and see what you can do with this incredible device that you have the power to control. And you'll bring all that stuff in your web of knowledge to bear on solving problems and creating new things out of nothing. It's kind of amazing. You just sit down and type on the keyboard and you make stuff from nothing like a novelist. Anyhow, I will write up a thing right now for you guys to work on after lunch. And then I'll be curious to see how that all turns out. And then tomorrow, the sprint challenge is deployed to Heroku. So that's going to be interesting. It's always interesting. And then the Project Week stuff, we're hammering that out. We'll have it out before Project Week. But be thinking about multi-user dungeons and that kind of thing. Alrighty, gang. I'll post the video. As always, it's always fun. It was always great to learn new stuff. I'm always stoked when I learn new things. I'm also stoked when I'm confused, because when I'm confused, it means I'm about to learn a new thing. So there's winning all over the place. All right, gang. Have a good lunch. Talk to you soon.